Welcome, everybody. My name is Julie Sasse. I'm the Chief Curator at the Tucson Museum of Art, and I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing and speaking with five artists who are part of the wonderful exhibition at the Etherton Gallery, Go Figure. Today, we're going to be speaking with Jack Bayless, Holly Roberts, Robert Wilson, Titus Costanza, and Ben Johnson. So we'll start with Jack Bayless. Jack was born in Chicago and studied architecture and design at the Illinois Institute of Technology, but then he got a BFA and an MFA in sculpture from Northern Illinois University. He later moved in the 1980s to Los Angeles and now splits his time between Arizona and Colorado. Jack and I go way back with exhibitions at the Tucson Museum of Art. He was included in the Grand Canyon From Dream to Icon that I did in the early 2000s. And most recently, he was included in the Western Sublime, which is an exhibition that Christine Brinza curated. He's, like all of these artists, collected widely by institutions. His works are at the Brooklyn Museum of Art, the San Francisco Museum of Art, the Denver Art Museum, and many others. Next, I'd like to introduce Holly Roberts. Holly Roberts was born in Boulder, Colorado, and earned her BA from the University of New Mexico in 1973 and her MFA from Arizona State University in 1981. She studied at the San Miguel de Institute. Did you study at the Bellas Artes?
Both.
Both, and the Instituto Allende and San Miguel de Allende. And I actually studied there in 1972. So
Wow.
We have some shared situations.
Wow.
Yeah. Holly has published 3 monographs on her work and has received 2 NEA grants, and she's been in hundreds of exhibitions around the country, including institutions like the Phoenix Art Museum, certainly the Tucson Museum of Art, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and many others. And like Jack Bayless, her works are found in all kinds of institutions around the country: the Art Institute of Chicago, the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, and the Center for Creative Photography. Robert Wilson actually had a 40-year career in the medical field, and I'd love to talk to you more about that as well. But he began taking art courses and working full-time as an artist in 2016. And of course, he had a fabulous mentor. He's married to Holly Roberts. So what a wonderful opportunity that must have been. He's shown at the Albuquerque Academy in New Mexico, the Harwood Art Center in Albuquerque, the Kemp Center for the Arts in Wichita Falls, Texas, and other venues throughout New Mexico and the Southwest. Wilson works in drawing, painting, woodworking, and metal sculpture, and works on view at the Etherton Gallery are primarily in carved wood and metal sculpture. And I just find the work absolutely fascinating. And then we have Titus, who actually, this is interesting, Titus Costanza is actually sitting right next to me, but we're going to be seeing him virtually. So I have this double whammy of technology. Titus has had well, actually, we go back from the time that I wrote a book on, there you go, wrote a book on the Citizens Warehouse. I think that's when I first got to know you and your work.
That's when we first met.
So that's, we can hopefully squeeze in a little bit of talk on the status of the Citizens Warehouse. But Titus has had a lifelong connection to the arts. His parents owned Tanglewood Gallery in New Jersey in the 70s, but interestingly, they tried to keep him from going into the arts. They kind of knew how rough it can be in that business. But he went on to get a BFA in Fine Arts and Illustration from the Ringling School of Art in 2001. This is what I find fascinating. In the senior year, he was hired by the Franklin Mint in Philadelphia, which is a company that does very fine art collectibles. And he worked as a staff artist in 2011. And then switched to full-time work as a fine artist, mainly producing portraits. But then you came back to Tucson. Now I hear about roots. So we'll talk about what you were doing and then coming back. And then, as I mentioned, he's part of the Citizens Art Collective, and we will be touching upon that as well because the warehouse is changing. And then we have Ben Johnson. He was educated at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia and then at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, which is a tremendous background. He's shown at the Moore College of Art and Design in Philadelphia, the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore, the Delaware Center for Contemporary Art, and the UA Museum of Art, etc. And he's been in a number of shows at the Tucson Museum of Art. I included him in Travelogue in 2019, Dress Matters in 2017, and where we met was soon after he came to Tucson, he was included in Desert Grasslands in 2013. So there you have it. Those are my introductions, and I'd like to jump right in. So I'm going to start actually with Jack. So Jack, one of the things that I've long noticed about your work is not only that you're one of the most prolific artists I've ever met, you must work 24 hours a day, but the notion of the male body as a notion of symbolism and meaning in contemporary society. So I would like you to muse a little bit with us about the concept of the male gaze and how you've upended it, if you would, with your work.
I would volunteer that I've been surrounded by images of women everywhere my entire life. And as a gay man, I've always been looking for images of myself, not that I look anything like the guys that I paint. I feel that there's this disparity. The male gaze has always been focused by straight men on women, and women have come across as objectified, et cetera, throughout. Whenever I walk through any museum, that seems to go hundreds of years back and surrounds me every day when I'm looking through art magazines, which is my habit in the morning and in the evening. You see a bunch on my bookshelves here, my catalog of art forums, et cetera. But my feeling is that men have been discounted throughout all this time, that people haven't been interested in looking at images of men, and I am. So I'm just trying to address that.
I would counter with, as maybe not your average museum goer or art viewer, I don't think it's that people haven't been interested. I think it's more that society has somehow dictated to us what we can look at. And certainly the women's movement changed the idea of the male gaze, and now it could be the female gaze,
Right.
or women gazing at other women. There's certain things that have changed where, there's a little more freedom to be honest and open about images or figures that are either desirous to us or of interest. And so I feel that right now we're starting to have an openness about all kinds of people and backgrounds. So you're positioned in a very good time for this kind of new openness. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Oh, I feel absolutely that way. I take a good cue from Kerry James Marshall, who's spent his whole career making images of Black men and women in a society that they just haven't, the images haven't been out there for people to look at. And so while my work has this, personal interest, it's also got this political level that
Right.
I want
Well, I'd
to.
like to talk about that. Before we shift to the idea of art as political, I do want to ask Titus, who do you see as your audience when you're doing these? Are you basically the audience?
Yeah, I have to admit, I think my audience is myself, but it doesn't go without that. I assume people are going to see this stuff, but I'm not necessarily trying to communicate to the viewer. This project, yeah, I was able to go back and revisit a lot of drawings, whether they were brief or longer, and cut them up or rearrange them and disassociate from the fact that maybe it is a figure, or that we look at this thing in a way that is now more objectified.
With your work, I see almost, and maybe this is something I'm reading into it, I almost see it like the cacophony of images that we see on the internet, flood of information that we get when we go on the internet. And even when we see each other on grids in Zoom meetings, that it's sort of all brought together from disparate places. And I don't know if you have any kind of an inspiration from that or not. But
Yeah, I'm
it seems-
absolutely using the figure to express my schizophrenia. Yeah.
Holly, it's clear that there's something to be read within your figures. They don't just stand in for a human archetype. There's something more going on. So how does that kind of symbolism work for what you're trying to convey?
Well, I think in all my pieces, but it's especially fun with the human figure, is when I can make it be more than what it is. So if it's a figure of a woman, if I can also have things going on that are photographic, that are different than what would normally be inside the figure of a person, then that makes you kind of snaps you to. It gives you this double-edged thing, which for me is really fun. You know, it's like that thing where you have the lamps, and if you look at them one way, they're lamps, and if you look at them the other, they're profiles. I think I just love using the figure as a vehicle to do stuff, to make things happen that you don't expect.
Well, of course, because you're right next door, I'll say to Robert, it may not be exactly like a language with your work, but I do see that you are transforming perhaps something from nature or something that is man-made, and you're transforming it into something else. So in a way, you're making one symbol into another symbol. Do you feel that that transformation or that transference is still symbolic in many ways?
One of the things that fascinates me is the way nature, and then to go even further, when man-made industrial materials also have that same stand-in for nature. So I think nature is my primary focus, but how I present it and what is interesting to me about the way it is presented has to do with these other metaphors for those natural parts. Um, the um, the wolf, the Mexican gray wolf, which is the white birch body, the bark really stands in for the pelt of the Mexican gray wolf for me. And I love that substitution. There's a piece there called, I think it's Sandhill Crane. It's a standing tall bird, water bird. And there's all kinds of tools in it, screwdrivers and hammers. And it's just amazing to me whether it's really, a substitution for a muscle or just happens to be there. But when you throw it all together, it works.
Ben, would you like to address the notion of objects or symbol or metaphor or language within your work?
For sure. Yeah, I love that idea, Robert, that you were just sharing about things standing in for other things, or this kind of fluidity of translation, if you will, and how there are constants that if we tune into, we can find kind of greater meaning in those objects. So I'm really interested in how objects carry their own energy, their own story, and it might be a surprising one, and it might take a little bit of time to tease that out. But there's something about placing objects and the human figure together, and that conversation that I'm really interested in as well. I've always been interested in the figure. As you mentioned, I studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, a classic, very traditional, figure-oriented program. And I was always most interested in the figure in context, the story. Every time that we were, in a very traditional academic setting, painting the model, I wanted to have a conversation with the model for the painting to make sense to me. So in the work that's in this exhibition, the figures in my work are all very small. They're all very diminutive, and they're nestled within this other larger context of objects and space. And I think that pokes at this, I'll say, core interest of mine of the human experience within the larger, greater natural world, which is infinite, which is beyond our comprehension. The group of work that's up there is part of a larger series of mine called Cataloging Infinity, which is kind of tongue in cheek. I just love those two words together. But it's a little bit about this idea of, you know, we do try to understand infinity, and just in our daily lives, we crave to understand our surroundings.
So, Holly, with your work, do you start with a potential storyline, or does the story sort of evolve once the viewer sees it? I almost feel like there's everything from fairy tales to other kinds of magic realism kind of elements to your work. So how much do you kind of embed the idea of a narrative or a story in your work?
Well, it's very, very important that I start without any idea of where I'm going.
Okay.
And when I'm teaching, I tell my students it's like following breadcrumbs in the forest. You have no idea where you're going to go, but you keep looking for that one little breadcrumb that's going to give you a hint. And that's when they work. If I have any idea, I might as well just throw my brushes out the window and walk out the door, because it ends up being dumb. So anyway, that's how I do. I just start. Generally I have paint to start. Paint gets me going. Paint releases me. Paint is my friend. Paint opens the doors, and then the rest follows.
Everybody has mentioned the idea that they work intuitively, and of course, Robert, if anyone has to work intuitively, it would be you, because you know, you're finding things and then making them into other things. So how do you feel that notion of intuition, when you know that there's an animal in that object for you, or a figure?
Well, you know, sometimes I don't know that there's an animal in there, but I will do something. For instance, the piece called Hedgehog Mountain, I had this idea of clear cut lumber on a mountainside, and I put that together, and it just took hours and hours and hours. And so I was very proud of this mountain. So when I show it to Holly, she said, well, I see an animal in there. And then I go, no, it's not an animal. And I'm very proud about defending that it's this mountain. But the more I look at it, I go, God, there is an animal in there. And I
get a lot of that.
Yeah. She gets the worst of me. And so then okay. And then, you know, it becomes an animal, but it's still kind of a mountain. So I guess, and that's the narrative of my pieces, is how they intuitively came about, or with little help from a friend came about. But I don't normally think in terms of a narrative. I think I'm more of a portrait, kind of animal portrait person.
Well, I have to ask then to Ben, some of the images where you're doing butterflies or animals up close, is it that notion of recording it because it's disappearing or it's precious, or what is the singular focus that you've been doing? What's your artistic intention with those?
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's exactly a layer to some of my work that's much more minimal. You know, these small paintings where it's a, you know, white background. I'm thinking of the painting Winter Sleeper of it's a little lizard that emerged from a wood pile when I was doing some yard work, and it was really early in the season, so it was moving really slow, and I was just thinking about habitat and how habitat can be so easily disturbed for the smallest of creatures, and how that has a great impact. And I was doing something innocent as, you know, just doing some yard work, and I totally ruined the day for this lizard that had to find another spot to re-hibernate in. But at the same time, I was thinking about, my goodness, how beautiful this creature is, you know, and we had an encounter that it was unexpected. And here's my human body and its animal body having a moment, and just how tenuous that exchange can be, and how it can be generous and helpful, and also can be destructive of my work.
In some regards, I see that as a celebration. I mean, in all of your work, there's a celebration of our interconnectedness in many ways, a celebration of our sexuality, a celebration of humanity. To me, it's all very uplifting. At the same time, there are some, you know, perhaps critiques of society or humanity, but in all of it, to me, it's definitely looking at perhaps the better side of our lives, the way you depict things. I want to shift gears a little bit and discuss, because some of you have this important element in your work, numbers and text, and how important text has entered in to tell that story or that narrative. And so I'm going to return to Jack, because you've got a lot of wonderful numbers and texts in your pieces. And how much is that important to the overall meaning of the work?
On a meta level, it seems very important. On a idiosyncratic level, the numbers mean almost nothing. They're like an inventory number. I started in 2002 to number things just for the hell of it, and I thought, well, everything I did before today will be number one, and so I started with number two, and I'm currently up to 1991 as of yesterday. And I thought I would give curators such as yourself something to talk about in the future.
And I did.
But what really interests me in the numbering that's happened since then is exactly what Titus is doing in his work, where he's taking older work and reconstituting it into these larger constellations, which I love. I love looking at these big new collages of yours, Titus.
Thank you.
Um, it's the opportunity to take something that you've done and years later reevaluate it and say, well, what do I have here? You know, Robert's saying, well, there's really an animal in that, you know, and I'm looking at old paintings and I'm thinking, well, if I turn it upside down, I could really turn this into something a lot more interesting and give it a new number. And so some of the paintings in the show have several numbers, and a couple of my pieces have 5 numbers because I just number it. Just yesterday, I was adding something to something that I did 2 years ago. So I gave it the current number. So now it's got 2 numbers, and it just signifies that there's been a big time jump in between layers of this particular piece. And I like that. I like that documentation. I've kept diaries for a long time, but to just consider that, you know, they're all kind of a jigsaw puzzle that comes together in some grandiose way in the future, to me is, I don't know, it's a different level of just making a particular piece. All of a sudden I have an opportunity to give it a dimension that I was never thinking about before.
I like that connection you're making there. I wouldn't have predicted that. And I think with what I was doing, like what you're saying, it's I'm cutting up my work, or I'm cutting an eye out of something or a head out of something, rearranging it, try to disassociate or make new connections. And with text, if I take a letter, I'm cutting that letter out of a word or a book or a sentence, and I'm rearranging it. So it's going into that conversation. So it's thematically consistent. It's reoccurring. So that would answer that question.
And Holly, you include text. I think there's a piece at least one piece in the Etherton show where you're using print material. Is that correct?
Yeah, but it's more just as substance. It's like dictionary pages, or but it's not to give it meaning. It's just
no particular trigger.
Yeah, yes, the background of it. Yeah, it's visual. Although it's interesting, a lot of times with those dictionary pages, all the words are just spot on, you know, after I look back at it.
Serendipity.
Yeah.
And do you ever use numbers on your work, or is it more just a text
No,
reference?
no, I would say never. Numbers and I are not friends, so I try and stay away from them.
They can be very leading or misleading. And
very misleading.
Ben, do you use a lot of text in your work? I think you had mentioned the notion of memory triggers with that, but tell us more.
Yeah, I really like about the meaning of text that's embedded beyond the language itself. So, one piece that's in this show is Water is Taught by Thirst, is it's a pairing, and again, this gets into the kind of the embedded story for me that kind of pushes the painting forward. It's a pairing of she's a award-winning swimmer. Her name is Annette Kellerman, and a really amazing feminist figure. She spearheaded she was arrested multiple times for wearing a one-piece bathing suit, the scandal of it. This is early 1900s. And she was a championship swimmer and an award-winning swimmer, and just an amazing figure. Without going too deep into her, which I could talk about her forever, her swimming came out of an illness when she was a child, and swimming was a therapeutic modality for her to heal. And then that pushed her forward into the rest of her life. And I paired an image of her with, it's a poem. The first line of that is "Water is Taught by Thirst" by Emily Dickinson. And that text it's hand painted by me, but I'm painstakingly essentially trying to not mimic, but match the handwriting of Emily Dickinson. And in a way, for me, making that piece was almost a dance for me, almost a kind of a dance of the brush, trying to physically inhabit Emily Dickinson, if I could, you know. And there's something about text for me. I do that a lot, where I dip into handwriting by artists, writers that I love. And in a way, for me, it's in honor of their words, but also in honor of their bodies. And me trying to really inhabit, okay, how do you make the letter I? And well, this is a weird way to make a W, but I'm gonna inhabit that space. So for me, text is almost this like time travel. I don't even know. It's this.
I'm going to shift again. There's a certain element, and forgive me, Robert, I'll have to swing back around because this one's going to be about photography. Many of you start from photography as your basis, and then Holly, of course, you actually utilize photographs. So why don't we start with you, Holly, in how photography has not only informs your work, but is integral to what you're doing.
It's really something. In my computer, I have something like, I don't know, 30,000 photo files. And I'd have to say, if we went through those, there'd probably be like 6 good photographs. Most of them are just, snapshots almost. But they completely guide me, help me, inform me. I love seeing the world and taking photographs. Although not so much anymore. I have so many photographs. I feel like when I do see something, I think, oh, I've already taken a photograph of that. But they're so important to finishing off, to kind of taking the reality of being real, air quotes there, into something else. So it's just, and I love looking at photographers and photography. And I think one of my first favorite artists was Diane Arbus, looking at her work. And so it's just there. And in my studio as well, in a flat file, I have hundreds and hundreds of cut up photos that I can go to horse heads or dog heads or feet or eyes or noses. So I have this amazing library of information that I can go through when I'm putting together a collage. Did
you study photography as your major at the
Well,
university?
no, I don't want this to get out, but I did take a photo class. I got a B- because I could never quite get the shutter stop thing, bigger, smaller. But I did.
Okay, I got a C in watercolor.
That's a hard one. Good to know. Good to know.
What do they mean?
But primarily all your work has photographs or cut up photographs in them. Do you have work that omits the photograph altogether, or is it?
Yeah, every once in a while I'll have something that just won't have anything photographic, but that's maybe 1 out of 50. And it just means that I was able to use other elements to pull it together. But I never would do just a straight painting or just have a straight photograph. There'd always be this marriage of these different.
And Jack, do you work with your models from photographs then, or how do you work with your models?
Wes and I both hire models, and they come over for about 2 hours minimum. and we take photos, and then we, much later down the road, uh, just use the photos as subject matter. Um, I don't, normally they're just generic poses. They're not in a set. They're not intended to be standalone photos. I do take some of those, um, but we started working with models 25 years ago, and I'm still using those photos like last week for somebody who's now 22 years older than he was 22 years ago. And that's a kind of different time shift that I get to talk about in some of the work. But um, um, I have a completely separate body of photos as an artist, and I take a lot of photos as a diary, as a visual diary. And then looking back through them, I could say, well, gee, this is an interesting image so many years later that might suggest a story. But I'll just show you. I have a whole file cabinet of I have about 6 drawers full of photo packets.
You're so well organized, Jack. I have to commend you.
The only way that I could find anything, God, it just drives me nuts.
See
So
if we can
I
see
have a
that
huge
job.
here.
archive, and I could keep going forever based on old photos, but
It sounds like you and Holly both share that ready stash of imagery. And Titus, are you working at all from the notion of photography, or are you?
Yeah, I do once in a while. I think it's just a tool, so it depends on what I'm doing, really. And I think that sense of I think to look back on older times and to understand ourselves as a people from long ago, I'll use photography. I love black and white photography. It inspires me to like kind of open that doorway into a different dimension. But I think for when I'm doing a portrait or a figure, it's best for me to keep it in real time and the real experience. And I just have this philosophy or this idea that if I can uh, do it in person live, it always comes out better. It's always a better process. I get more out of that process. It's more,
To me,
yeah,
I see that.
it's
I
more
don't see it
personal. Yeah,
as photographic based. There seems to be that
yeah,
direct connection to the sitter or the
yeah.
person that you're depicting.
Yeah, and I've played around with that idea because I'm thinking, okay, we have access to photography, and I'll do work just over the years as well. I just take note. I'll do work from photography, and then I'll do work from live stuff, and I compare the two, and I'm thinking, which not necessarily which one's better, but yeah, sure, which one am I happier with? What were these processes like? And it's always more enriching for me to just be in that personal experience and have that thing. And I guess because it's so you never know where it could go. It's you're now if you are with another person, it can go in so many different directions.
Definitely a dynamic that's not happening from the photo.
Two minds are coming together and connecting somehow. A photograph is great, but it's more going internal and how you feel about this thing you're looking at.
Yeah,
It's not
there's
a
not a
two-way.
reciprocal
Yeah,
thing
it's
with
not
the photo.
reciprocal. Yeah.
So Ben, do you work from photos? Your work is so exacting. It's just amazes me.
Hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I do. I do work from photographs, which I did somewhat reluctantly because I do love working from life directly. Years ago, when I was painting birds as my main subject, I started to lean into using photography as a reference for birds in flight. You know, I just found it impossible to, you know, capture any details. So I leaned into photography, and I really loved it. I loved how I could slow down in the studio and not feel like I was rushed by the changing light in the studio or outside. And now I'm really interested in painting the physicality of photographs. I've become really interested in photographs as physical objects and playing with that sort of trompe l'oeil quality of being a painter and looking at a photograph and not just painting the content of the photograph, but painting the physical photograph itself with all of its cracks and all of its weathering and how there's kind of a deeper story with the physicality of an image as well as what the image actually is, and exploring that as a painter to me has a lot of exciting energy.
Well, I think we're kind of we could go on for hours, but there's one sort of topic I'd like us to touch on briefly, and that's the notion of we're in a very strange time now, and I know everybody starts everything with something about COVID, but we're in a very I would say unstable, both in society and our politics and in nature. Everything seems to be in a bit of a sense of chaos, and I was wondering how do you see yourselves contributing to making sense of all of it, or to be an antidote to some of what's happening? How do you see your work having meaning in a time of complete and utter upheaval? Does it matter to you, or do you operate outside of that, or do you feel that this is the best time for your work to be seen? So we'll start from the beginning again with Jack, and then I would love to hear from all of you about this.
You're asking a really good question, Julie. This era we're living in right now is one of the most fucked up eras I've ever heard, lived through, whatever in my life. Having said that, I feel like it's a great opportunity for artists to address all sorts of crap that's going on. I stick my head in the sand. I don't read the paper, or I try not to. I see headlines. I don't watch TV. I subscribe to the New York Times, so I'm a dyed-in-the-wool liberal who grew up in Chicago, and I just like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And when COVID shut the world down, I retreated into the studio and thought, I am so lucky as an artist to have this big thing that I'm working on as an artist called my body of work. And I, in Tucson, in March, I started a series of 22 by 30 inch ink drawings based on photos of our models. And I was creating images of people who couldn't come over, and so the series is called Company. And in 6 months, I'm up to about 99 images right now. That it's like it's been a saving grace that it just kind of keeps me sane. And I think it intersects the situation in an oblique way. It's like, here's somebody who's trying to hang on when all this other crap is going on. And so, and including the virus, it's like I'm waiting for it to get over and hoping, etc.
Right there with you. And Holly and Robert, talk to us about that, about the world in the state it's in, and how your work matters to you or to the world, how that affects things.
When COVID first hit, I just stopped working. It just seemed so, we just had delivered this show to Terry, and of course it got shut down, and it was just so discouraging. And I started riding this horse, a friend's horse, a young, really great horse. I used to ride a lot as a kid, and I sort of began to do what I'd done as a teenager. And so three times a week, I was over working with this horse. And then I found that then began to translate into my images. I began to do these horse images. And I felt like I had this connection with this animal. And it helped me escape. It helped me get away from this awful stuff going on. And then as I began to make the work, I don't think you think of it as, oh, this is going to help everybody, but it helped me. It helped sustain me and keep me going. And I've just done these 3 absolute beautiful big horse pieces that Bob and I are both go in the studio and gasp. We're so pleased with them. So something good, I guess, has come out of this terrible time. But yeah.
I'll jump in. Another thing about Holly's work that, whether it's COVID or just modern times, it's been a trial for a while now, but Holly's work makes serious statements, but there's always humor as well. And it's like you can't really maybe say what the joke is, but there's a joke in there. And I feel like my work, especially carved and painted wood, is also it's cartoony in a way, the way I see it. So that and cartoons are funny, kind of like Philip Guston or Roy DeForest, or that kind of cartoonism is kind
Call
of
it
funny.
playfulness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that Virga piece, it's this little lumpy cloud, which is way too small for all the tendrils of rain coming out of it. And it's cartoony. Um, um, the piece, the tree of good and evil, a tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is right in the middle of the gallery, has an Adam and an Eve head on it and a snake. And if you look at Adam's head, it's LeBron James. So, I mean, these things happen, and it's a way of kind of, I think, changing our focus from the dire times and sort of escaping into things. But at the same time, I think I'm making a statement about honoring these animals that are in danger of being gone. The other big wolf is the gray wolf, is this kind of surreal dream wolf, and it's gone. That's a dire wolf. That's a big one, and it met its extinction years ago. So yeah, I think it's a way of honoring what really upsets me is losing these animals and honoring the animals. And then on the other hand, it's the comedic view of life.
Mhm. And Titus, how do you feel about how your work is informed by the current situation in our world, or how it operates outside of it?
Yeah. Uh, it was, I think it was hard at first, as emotional as I think it was. It almost seemed meaningless to do this thing I was doing. It took me a while to try to scramble around and find meaning in that, but it's kind of like Holly was saying, you just get on with experiencing and living life and having these experiences. And I think naturally, just doing that, it started to slowly come back, and I found the tendency to want to create again, and that was helpful. But yeah, and that experience was helpful because now I was able to revisit it and understand a little bit or appreciate a little bit more, uh, that I can create and I do create, and I need to create sometimes, and maybe not all the time. Maybe it doesn't define me, but it's definitely something I use to process my emotions and my world. And I think that was an amazing experience. I f- I and I see this thing impact artists differently with all my artist friends. Some people, they've they've just been fueled by all this. They haven't left their studio. They're cranking out artwork. Some artists are completely stifled and are frozen. So I've experienced a wide range of this stuff. So I don't know if there's any one way to pin me, but I think that's the way I would say it.
It sounds like it's all of your sanctuary. And
Yeah.
Ben, I would think you're probably one of the ones who can shut everything out as well, but tell me about how this has affected you.
Yeah, it has been obviously just a roller coaster emotionally, and um, I did go through some times of questioning, what is it to be in the studio when all of us are suffering in different ways and facing challenges. But yeah, as I said, I've returned, and I feel like I'm fueled and galvanized now by the fact that art making and being a part of art, whether it's as a viewer or and art on all levels is healing, and it's not in spite of, or art making doesn't ignore the realities that are happening outside of the studio for me. In a way, it's in addition to. And I just love the idea of being reminded myself in my work, and hopefully having this come through, that there's a larger context that all of this is happening within, and and that there still is beauty in the world, and lots of it, and we need that even more now than ever. So I feel like as artists, um, yeah, there's a lot of reasons to be making work right now.
Well, that couldn't be a better way to end this conversation. I so look forward to this, and I really had a wonderful time learning more about your work and talking with you all today. If you can't come to the Etherton Gallery to see the exhibition, do check their website out to see not only this show, but the many talented artists at the Etherton Gallery. They are truly a jewel in this city and in this region. And we certainly want to support the Etherton Gallery as much as possible because they do amazing work and they have an incredible staff. And thank you to Daphne for putting this together. Terry, as always. And thank you again, every one of you. It was a pleasure to talk with you again, and I hope to see you all in person very, very soon.
Thank you,
And by
Julie.
the way, Ben Johnson is in the Arizona Biennial, a little plug for that, which opens next Friday to the public.
All
So
right.
once again, thank you very much.
Congrats,
Thank
Ben.
you, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you.
Julie.
See you in New Mexico.
Okay.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Very good.
Take care.
Namaste. Bye-bye.